The October 8th work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
First on the agenda would be the council preview for our meeting scheduled for October 11th, 2018. Mr. Trivett, is there anything you'd like to highlight?
It's a pretty full agenda. We have a couple of awards to present, so that'll be exciting. There's also a couple of public hearings, one of which focuses on adding amusement arcade to the downtown business district. And then under new business, we'll be appointing a new city council clerk. And we do have an ordinance to consider increasing the parking fines consistent with our presentation back in October.
Questions for Mr. Trivett?
No, sir. No, sir.
October a year ago.
We're now happy to open the floor to public comment. Anybody who'd like to address council on any of the matters coming before us at our Thursday meeting or anything at all, we'd be happy to hear from you. Seeing no one, we will move on to background presentations and discussions, the first of which is the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance Quarterly Tourism Report. We have with us today Bob Harris, the Interim Executive Director of the Williamsburg Tourism Council. Welcome, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. It's nice to address you guys today. Hope you're all doing well. Can we pull up the presentation? Is that possible?
It should come up right when you click it.
Oh. You are so far advanced from what I'm used to. I'm sorry about that.
Magic.
It's like magic. We call it technology.
It is like magic.
And practice.
Thank you very much. Wanted to give you a brief update today on some of the activities we have been going through at the Alliance, and this will be a different presentation to you because I'm not going to share with you today the tourism scorecard. I want your input on that. With the Williamsburg Tourism Council very busy and working towards some new research, we're looking at some new data that we think will be helpful to the Tourism Council, but hopefully also helpful to you. So once we get that underway and get your input, we will move forward with that more. The Williamsburg Tourism Council has now had 2 meetings. We will have our 3rd meeting next Tuesday, the 16th at 1 p.m. here. We have established a direct landing page on the Visit Williamsburg site for that meeting content. It's the williamsburgtourismcouncil.com. That landing page is everything from the agendas, the meeting materials, past meeting information, as well as information that before was housed on the wadmac.com website. Just to give a refresher in case you haven't seen, these are the members of our Williamsburg Tourism Council. Jeff Wasmer from York County Board of Supervisors is our chair. Neil Chalkley from the Williamsburg Hotel Motel Association representative is the vice chair. And Ruth Larson with James City County Board of Supervisors is our treasurer. And Doug Pons also serves on the council as a member of the City of Williamsburg City Council. These are just a few of the things that the Williamsburg Tourism Council is currently working on. They have an executive director search committee that's been established and working on search plans for a permanent executive director that is being chaired by Doug Pons. We also have established a bylaws committee that is chaired by Mickey Shohan, and they're working on getting the bylaws together for consideration for the Williamsburg Tourism Council. We're working also, as I mentioned earlier, on tourism metrics research RFP. And this is kind of some information that will give us the ability to guide tourism measurements, econometric measures for the destination, as well as provide some information that we hope will be helpful to you as the council for the city specifically. We're also working on developing the tourism marketing and sales plan for 2019 as the clock is ticking, and we have to get that media buy started very quickly. Speaking of the clock ticking very quickly, I just wanted to kind of show you this graphic, which just gives you kind of a summary of some of the activities that we have. It's very important that we get the plan approved by December so that our agencies can purchase the media while it's still a competitive price for us for 2019. Some good news for us with some of the effort that we've been doing as a destination for consumer marketing, some of the public relations. To give you a little update there, we were really pleased to see that Expedia named Williamsburg as one of the most tourism-friendly cities in the U.S. This is one of the first times that we have landed on that poll. And TripAdvisor also recently, I don't have a graphic from this one, but they also recently named us as a top cultural experience destination. And when we talked to them as they were doing the press release, they said usually it's much larger cities like New York City and San Francisco that land on this list. So they were very pleased to see that Williamsburg did make this list, and it's something we should celebrate. For our Far Arts campaign that we have done each year for many years now, we've kind of adjusted a little bit our approach with that, not just to focus solely on the arts, but to also focus a lot on the target market that we find most likely comes to our destination during the fall, and that is also couples. So this is a native placement that we have with Travel and Leisure, a very popular travel magazine, and we are talking about romantic adventures in Williamsburg, Virginia, something that people may not always think about, but those of us who live here realize it is a good destination, from some of our outdoor activities to some of the on-the-water activities, to our history, to the arts, of course, as well, and local wine, craft beer. There again, you see the art scene there. The College William Mary is incorporated into their recommendations of things to do, and of course, the culinary tourism continues to be a big thing, as well as many of the trails in the area. Kind of wanted to share that with you. Also for Fall Arts, we did a takeover, as we call it, of the East Coast Gateway Welcome Center. That's the I-64 Welcome Center. As you're coming from Richmond to Williamsburg, they get about 7,000 cars a day there, so it is quite a highly visited center. And we're able to decorate the center and drive people to more information about Williamsburg this fall, and particularly the fall art season. Sports Williamsburg continues to be something that we spend a lot of time and effort on. As you know, we bring in a lot of groups into this destination who are looking for destinations that not only have great sports facilities, but destinations that also have a lot for the families that come with those people to enjoy. One of the big tournaments that we're working on right now is a basketball tournament for this year that will occur the week between Christmas and New Year's, which is not a huge time for people to visit all of our properties, and it's going to bring in about 1,400 room nights. It's a group that's been using Charleston for a number of years, and they're looking for a different destination. They're still going to have it in Charleston. We're not stealing business from them, but they want to expand and give families a different destination that they can go to that has the facilities that they need, but also has great things for families to do during that holiday time of the year. Our group tour sales effort continues very strongly. We had the Student Youth Travel Association convention was held in Baltimore, so it was very nearby this year. We partnered with the 2019 commemoration and Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, who were a major sponsor of that event this year, and we were able to have a booth with them where we could talk to the tour operators about the destination. Williamsburg always ranks in the top 10 of student youth travel destinations in America by this organization, and it's one of the best trade shows that we have as far as tour operators really sending a lot of business here. And we're staying busy with familiarization tours, as we call them. That's when we bring in tour operators, travel agents, and media to the destination. It's the best way to really get them to understand the destination a little bit better. This weekend, we had a company called Jet Set, which is a major tour operator out of the UK, and they brought in some of their top producing travel agencies that booked their business coming to the U.S. They visited Colonial Williamsburg, they visited Jamestown, and they were able to also visit the Occasion for the Arts, which they really liked to see that we had a nice, vibrant cultural scene here as well. We will also be hosting a major media fam here, October the 24th through the 27th. Some excellent writers coming from magazines up and down the East Coast. And then in late October, we'll have a Visit USA, which is our national travel and tourism organization. We'll be doing what they call a mega fam. It'll be here October the 29th and 30th, and it's a group coming from China to visit us. So for a lot of them, it's not a destination they always think of, but it's a good chance to familiarize them a little more with our destination. Conference sales continues to be important for us. Conference sales gives us some of that base business that's often at a higher dollar value, and they often book a year, maybe even 2 years out. So Dominique Holt and our staff has really worked hard this year to revitalize our conference sales efforts. That's one of the trade shows that she went to this year called Connect, where she came back with over 15 leads that she's currently trying to develop for our destination. She's also doing a really interesting program called Lunch and Learns, where we go to key target markets, and she sets up a luncheon at a really cool restaurant in the destination. She invites meeting planners in. Several of our conference hotel partners will go with us. It's a chance for us to do a presentation talking about what's new in some of the conference venues in town, and get a chance to meet with them, not necessarily in a trade show format where they meet with hundreds of other people, but on a one-on-one basis, which we are finding is much more successful for us right now. And also just wanted to give you an update that we did use some of the technology for the Visit Williamsburg website this year to help during the Hurricane Florence situation that occurred. The little gold stripe that you see at the top of the page is a technology that we have called Bound. We often use it to deliver messages to people based on where they're coming from, or some of the interests that they have used when they searched for information on the Williamsburg area. Maybe it's a couple coming to the area, we'll deliver a message about some romantic packages for the weekend or what have you. We were able to actually use that technology during Hurricane Florence to do the little banner at the top that people could click on, and they'd be directed to a page that had links to each of our municipalities' emergency information, which we thought was very helpful. But we also worked with each of our municipalities to do a survey each day of our lodging partners to see who had accommodations available so they would know in case there was an emergency or an evacuation that was required, who had how many rooms and how many they need to send out. We also worked with our attractions to get information out about who was open, when they were open, and then sensitively also push out information about when the destination was back open, when all the attractions were open as well. That's a brief update on some of the activity since we last met. See if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thanks, Mr. Harris. I appreciate you coming in today. Really don't have any questions for you. It's good to see that the activity is continuing, and I know that you and the staff have having to deal with some of the turmoil of the new organization, and I appreciate everybody's effort to hanging in there and sticking with us while it all gets settled. I was going to save it for later, but he mentioned the search committee. I hope to have a recommendation for the Tourism Council on the 16th of a firm, so we've kind of narrowed it down pretty tightly, and we're in the process of doing some reference checks, and so hopefully we'll have something then.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, for being here today and presenting to the council and also to the public about updates from the Tourism Council side. I did also want to point out Ms. Terry Bonez from the Business Council side of the Alliance is here, so if you haven't met her yet, she's a great lady, and we're very much looking forward to working with you. I didn't have any questions, but just a general observation, as folks obviously know already, we are seeing many, many more dollars come in. A great, tremendous opportunity to market our region now. I recall the discussion, throughout the past few years, how our competitor, what we would regard as our competitor markets, would vastly outspend this particular region in terms of marketing dollars, and it's good to see that we're at least sizing up to some of our larger competitors. But it'll be a lot of opportunity, and I'm looking forward to seeing the progress made. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And I would just like to echo my thank you for a very succinct presentation. It was nice seeing it all put together in a number of slides. The only thing I would ask is for the metrics for the tourism stays and
right.
information, should any questions be directed to you?
Please.
And by when would that information
as soon as
be
possible.
available?
We're trying to get that RFP out very quickly. Our goal is to have the research start by the beginning of the year. So as soon as you can let us know. We've tried to listen to a lot of your feedback throughout the year of things that were important to you, things like visitor counts. That's one of the areas we've never really been able to give our folks in economic development, other areas, accurate counts on. So we're hoping that will give us a better idea on that. But any other ideas you guys have, we'd like to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. In terms of those metrics, what categories are you looking at for overnight stays? I mean, are you looking at stay with friends, timeshare, the whole gamut?
It's a quantitative study, so it's going to look at a broad look of the population who visited the destination, and we will be asking those types of questions, and we want it to be cross-tabulated data so that we, and this is what we're proposing, the council may have a different idea, so let me first suggest that, but I think the data that we've seen that works the best is when you can look at those different individuals who visit based on those criteria, where they stayed, how many nights they stayed, where they're from, and have as many of those cross tabs as you can to try to see what variations. It helps you develop the message for that market segment, but also be able to better serve them with everything from web content to your sales efforts.
Thank you.
Mr. Harris, could you help me understand the scorecard or the result of the survey? Is this something that's going to be a singular point in time? Is it going to be an ongoing effort at research that will give us periodic updates? And if so, what is the period over which we'd be updated?
That's what we're asking the research companies. Some of the data is traditionally done on an annual basis. For example, a visitor count. Most destination marketing organizations get that on a monthly basis. Some will get visitor count and hotel information on a monthly basis, but the visitor count comes on an annual basis, not a monthly basis. So we want them to make suggestions and recommendations to us as to the type of research that they have, and that's where it's really critical that we put as much in that scope of work, and then they come back to us with a recommendation as to what they've done with other destinations. We've seen some examples of particularly some of the visitor count and economic impact data that we have, the econometric data that other destinations are using, and try to pull as many points from those as we can.
So there's some data that is very hard for a jurisdiction to understand on their own, such as who is coming, where are they coming from, how many of them are coming. Then there's the data that's pretty objective, that we all capture and we report independently. Is the Tourism Council still looking at consolidating the jurisdictional data and whatever state data is available and then reporting on that?
Yes, most likely all that data will be used to complete that full data report. So they will be relying on all types of data like that. They may look at Smith Travel Research. There's a company that does something similar called Destinametrics, which incorporates Smith Travel Research, but they also look at things like condos that may be rented or timeshares. There are a lot of different options out there, and so that's how we will be evaluating the different proposals to see who comes up with a proposal that best understands our destination and delivers a product that our Tourism Council feels is best for our region.
Do you envision any sort of ongoing quarterly scorecard going forward?
I think that would be helpful to the municipalities. I haven't heard anyone say that they don't want that. I think that everyone wants something that's not telling you information that you aren't already receiving. So that's something we're trying to work toward as well. It's something that will be helpful to you as you continue to manage your part of the destination as well. So,
for what it's worth, in my observation of the data, and you can jump in here, Mr. Pons, if you have a different opinion, one of the weak points,
Never differ.
yeah, one of the areas where it was hard for me to really believe what I was seeing in the scorecard was the length of stay, the average length of stay that was presented to us. If there's a way that whatever research firm could help us get a handle on that, not just at that one moment, but on an ongoing basis, I think that would be particularly helpful.
the data we receive from the state is what we typically report for length of stay, and that's usually composite that incorporates many types of visitors, people who are coming to visit family, people who are using campgrounds, people who are coming to timeshares, and people who are staying in our traditional hotel lodging. And the length of stay for each of those often varies. So whatever research we would have, that's where that cross-tabulation would really help us to understand the difference between those different types of visitor who comes to our area.
Other questions?
No, but I agree with length of stay. But, just thinking about the state's numbers, the VTC always says, we get more tourism spending here than anywhere in the state. And I just, and the formula that they use to come up with that number is not one that I think it really fits our destination. Just look at all the tax dollars that come in terms of the 1% and do the multiplier on that and realize that we're not doing $1.4 billion worth of tourism spending. So I think Tourism Council and staff are really going to have to dig into those types of pieces of information.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Colonial Group Home Commission presentation. Peter Wallentish, Human Services Director, and Mr. Thomas Maynor, Colonial Group Home Commission.
Mayor and members of council, I'm very pleased and honored to present this as the chair of the commission. I have been for the past few years, only because over the 28 years I've been here, there have been many a foster child who we took into emergency custody, and then the court awarded us custody of the children who went through Crossroads and the commission services. So I want you to know there's a long history of city youth that we, through our department here, did manage to get into the services of the commission. And all I can say is thank God for that, because it was both a moral imperative to keep the youth in the community and the cost-saving measure so that we did not pay high detention costs with very little to see as a result. I would like to recognize today, if you would stand please, Mr. Brian Fuller, who is the Director of Community Services in York County. He also serves as the administrator of the commission on behalf of York, and Ms. Sherry Newcomb, who is the Deputy Director as well. So they were pleased to join us here today. And I will turn this over to Tom now, and then at the end we'll briefly summarize the formula and the reason to update. Thomas Maynor, for the record, who is our citizen representative.
Welcome, Mr. Maynor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council and members of this community. This has been a 5-year enterprise on my part, and it's been something that always concerned me as a pastor, watching people get taken into detention and put into adult jails. And that was one of the things that when Peter asked me if I would consider serving the city on this commission, that I agreed to do so. The commission is, I think you have already had the chance to see this, but it is York County, and they provided exceptional administrative services to the commission. They have been enormously helpful, and they continue to bear that load. John Carnifax and Chris McDonald from James City, Pete Wallentish and myself from Williamsburg, and Stephanie Tensley and Darren Post from Gloucester County. And we also have the city of Poquoson as part of this, and Matthews. So we are doing a regional approach to taking care of this particular portion of the juvenile justice system. Am I there? Yes. We offer these 4 services. They're Crossroads Community Youth Home, Community Supervision, Psychological and Substance Abuse Services, and Project Insight, which I'll elaborate on. Our mission is to serve the participating localities by offering behavioral and rehabilitative services to youth who've come under the juvenile justice system, and we use a community-based and an integrated approach. Our vision is to give the youth of the community a chance to live healthy and productive lives, and one of the things that appeals to me is that this does provide, particularly for kids who get in trouble for the first time, an alternative to incarceration. Sometimes you know and feel that going to an adult jail like Merrimack or others gives them a chance to learn how to be better criminals. Sometimes. They were not criminals to begin with. They became admitted to the system because they made a serious mistake. It creates a safe and a structured and a positive environment. It helps them overcome some challenges they might not be otherwise able to do if they remained home or went into Merrimack. They do become productive citizens. We have good follow-up on that, and it does reduce recidivism. At our Crossroads Community Youth Home, 84% of all dispositional youth released from the program were successfully released and returned home. On Project Insight, which is our community service work, 93% successfully completed the program. And on Project Insight, the law-related education, 98% completed the program. On the recidivism and outcome, 100% successfully completed the program, 69% under intensive supervision remained delinquent-free while in the program, and 79% of our youth remained delinquent-free while in the program. I want to mention at this point that because we cannot go beyond the year 18 when they are move into a different situation, we do not have the ability, because of privacy concerns, to do recidivism follow-up beyond their 18th year. So that's why we can't do the longer-term thing, the longer-term appraisal. On psychological services, 91% of our youth that completed the program remained drug-free for the full duration of the program. 81% of all youth participating in the aftercare and drug treatment program remained substance-free throughout the year. And this is where we get the money for that. The largest portion comes from the local revenue, which we share from the jurisdictions that I mentioned. The state revenue comes out of the Virginia Juvenile, primarily comes out of the Community Crime Control Act of 1995. We were founded in 1985, and the state came into this program in 1995. And the law, which is not very large, but the law is pretty succinct, and we seem to hit the top points of why that 1995 law was passed by the Commonwealth. It needed to be a community-based system of progressive, intensive actions and services that correspond to the severity of the offense and the treatment needs. Now that's good judgment, a way to judge things. Yet the purpose of the program is to deter crime by creating and providing immediate, effective punishment that emphasizes accountability to the juvenile offender for his or her actions, as well as reducing the pattern of repeat offenders. And recidivism on the adult side, I think, is one of the times I studied this a few years ago, was 71% on recidivism. So we are trying to avoid that kind of thing with juvenile offenders. It needed to be a community-based system. It needed to be made up of progressive, intensive sanctions and services. It corresponds with the severity of the offense. You don't get nailed with an overloaded penalty for something that was not as serious as it might seem. We provide an adequate level of services which you do not get when you send somebody to Merrimack, for example. It allows local autonomy and flexibility as we try to adjust juvenile crime. It encourages public and private partnership in the delivery of services. It emphasizes parental responsibility and gets parents involved in this program because of the way we are able to do it. It facilitates a locally driven statewide planning process for allocating state resources. And it does provide an adequate service facility, capacity. The value of a community youth home is that the youth remain connected to their families. They are allowed to remain in the community. And one of the most exciting things that I've found to be positive is their continued involvement in the public schools to which they attended previously. And this is supervised both to and from school, and they come back to Crossroads, for example, and they earn points by their behavior both in school and at Crossroads. It gives us access to available support services which are provided by the various community and localities, and it gives them local employment opportunities, and it helps them in their opportunities for development and growth. But I want to give these figures, cost-benefit figures, to you. The detention current per diem rate, the formula is based on a 5-year average, is $168.20. Crossroads currently discounted rate, which is based on the community locality budget, is $130. If you send a child to Merrimack for 365 days for one youth, it is $61,393. If you send one to Crossroads, it is $47,000. And the savings is $13,943, but I think the more important thing is it's cost-effective to all incarceration. It invests in the youth and gives them a chance that they might not have should they just go to adult prison. It produces a stronger and safer community because we take crime seriously. And at the end of the day, an investment in our youth is truly an investment in the community's future. I'm going to turn this over to Peter to deal with some changes that you are aware of that we need to make relative to the founding documents. And thank you for your time, and we will answer questions.
I understand our interim city manager has already briefed you on the formula change, so unless you have any questions in that regard, nothing's been really updated for all these 30-some years. So it's time to the administrators of all the localities and the city manager have been meeting for a few years to talk about formula change from general population to ultimately get to utilization. So there's a staggered plan where that formula incrementally changes each year to get to a utilization formula. So from general population base to utilization over a 4 or 5 year period. That's the sum and substance of it. If you have any questions, we'd be pleased to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Maynor, Mr. Wallentish, and thank you, Mr. Fuller and Ms. Newcomb, for being here too. Come to my colleagues for questions.
Thank you, sir. And so, don't really want to harp on the numbers, because I think what you're doing in this program is absolutely invaluable. And you're absolutely right. Sending, a young person to, a traditional jail when there's an opportunity to work with that child, mentor that child, counsel that person, and make them a more productive citizen. Can't put a dollar value on that. And so, but as I understand the numbers, currently, we're switching the model to a formula that charges the municipality where the person has been arrested. Is that correct, or am I oversimplifying?
That has always been the formula. It's where the crime is committed, and that is also true for the detention centers. So I think back when they did this, they wanted to stay in line with what was already there. It's an old formula, but again, that could be subject to discussion down the road.
Right. Rather than a formula where the municipality where the child resides would pay.
That's correct.
Well,
but let me make a point, Mr. Pons. In my experience, a vast majority of youth that we've dealt with that went to Crossroad or received commission services were from the city of Williamsburg. I should point that out.
Yeah, no, and I think you hinted to that earlier in your comments. But with all that said, I still think that this is again a program that, despite I think there's going to be an increase to the city of Williamsburg, and it's money well spent. I believe. I think the opportunity to have these, to be able to touch these children a little bit more in the ways that you all described is, again, valuable. So thank you for that work, and I look forward to continuing to support it. Thank you.
And I echo with what Vice Mayor Pons had mentioned in the beginning of his remarks. I had actually tutored at the Merrimack Juvenile Detention Center when I was an undergrad, and while I do think that Merrimack has done a great job in terms of its programming and it's well managed and run, just being there, it definitely has that feel of a very much of a different environment than I would imagine at Crossroads. And just seeing the statistics, I don't know generally how that compares with other localities, but seeing the 80% to 90% success rates, I think is pretty impressive. I don't know how other localities would compare if they get any higher, but that seems very impressive and very effective. And again, what Vice Mayor Pons said, I think that's an invaluable investment to our community as well. And certainly providing alternative means to incarceration, it's a different culture, it's a different mindset. I do find it a little curious why we haven't, or I guess the original agreement, not we, but I guess the older partners had not updated the agreement since 1985, but I'm glad the Commission's taking the steps to revising that now and having that discussion, and just wanted to offer my appreciation to you and also to Mr. Maynor, Pastor Maynor, and to the rest of our counterparts on this. In terms of the timeline, you say that you've been in touch with all the county administrators from our partner localities. I guess what's the timeline for action over the next year or two before this gets considered?
Again, it's a staggered formula that has already started.
Okay.
And we're I believe in the third phase of that at this point. Am I right, Brian? This is the third phase? It started general population, then it went with the number of minors in your locality, juvenile population, and the percentages have just been staggered over the years. I'll let Mr. Fuller handle that.
Okay. Thank you.
The current program, we started, I've just been involved with the Commission for the last year and a half. That's one of the things that we've wanted to do is look at the funding formulas. So we met with the county administrators and city managers, and they had different opinions. So we came up with this proposal to as the end result, they wanted to get to full utilization. And that's similar to what some of the Merrimack Center is, the regional jail, and all of those. So we took a look at all the localities, and instead of trying to go from just point A to point B, the end result, that really would have affected some of the counties and cities drastically. So we came up with this method to gradually get into that, so it wouldn't hit any one jurisdiction is too hard. Because really, we looked at this as a regional approach. All the localities have to do something with the youth. We could all do it individually and spend probably a lot more money, or we could do it collectively and share the resources and share the cost. And that's worked really well over the commission time.
Right. Well, thank you for your, all of y'all's commitment to a deliberate process. Appreciate it.
I don't have any particular questions for anyone specific, but I was just curious as to how many youth were normally in the home and sort of what their ages were and their length of stay.
The group home, we serve typically 14 to 17-year-olds. Once they get 18, they age out, and then they go back. They become adults, and we don't take care of them. The group home is licensed for 16. We're staffed for 12. This past year, we've averaged about 8 youth. Some of that's changing with the judges and how they sentence youth, so we may see some decline in that, but that's only one piece. In community supervision, we have the ability to take 18 youth right now. Those youth have to be visited by staff 3 times a week in their homes. So that's, the kids are in school, so that's after school. The state, as the state can do, puts different requirements and additional requirements. Now they're requiring us to visit them on weekends. So I have 2 staff that have to visit 18 kids 3 times a week, anywhere from the Hampton City line to Matthews to New Kent to James City County up here, and on weekends. So that's one of the things that we're trying to build our staff up, because we've had this same number of staff. We've had a requirement that we have to visit them more often and at various times. So it's really put a burden on staff. In our community supervision program, we can take a volunteer program. We can take up to 150, and we currently have 100. So at any one time, we may have 100, 125 kids in various different programs that we are offering throughout the time. As far as length of stay, some stay 2 and 3 weeks, short care. Some that are longer in there for a month, 6 months, some a year, some until they age out. The goal is, is once they get through our programs, is to get them back into the home. We've started up a parenting program to try to do some additional counseling with the parents to get them, because the last thing we want to do is return them back into the environment that's the same as what got them in there. So we've got to take a holistic approach and look at the entire thing through counseling and training and some of the programs that we do to hopefully get them into a spot where it's better for them. But then we'll meet with the social workers, the probation officers, and our staff to make sure that it's a good environment they're going to be released back into.
Thank you for the additional explanation. I find it helpful, and as Mr. Pond said, it's an invaluable tool for the community and provides hope and opportunity for youth that wouldn't have it otherwise. So,
thanks. You've answered my questions about occupancy, and it seems like you never have a situation where you don't have enough room for anybody.
No, we've been fortunate. We've been fortunate that even when at their peak we get to 10 or 12. It is a coeducational facility. Therein has its own set of challenges when you're dealing with teenagers. So that is quite a fun time when we get both boys and girls at the same time. But we always take care of our members first. So the member localities, we are working at looking at the ability to take some kids through the foster care program for short term, or through social services where they need to get a child out of the house for a short period of time. We're looking at ways to offer those services as well, and even to other localities throughout the area. But we always take care of the commission members first. So we always have room for them.
Thank you.
I don't think I have any questions directly for you. Mine are going to be maybe for Mr. Trivett or just probably rhetorical. Mr. Trivett, do you think we could get some information on what the recidivism rate is for young people who are sent to the juvenile detention center as opposed to, I don't expect you all to have that, but it would just be interesting to know if we're at 69% delinquency-free under intense supervision or 79% with electronic monitoring, what is it for the population at the Merrimack Center?
Certainly, yeah, that'd be helpful.
Second question I have is there a benefit, what portion of the operation of the jail or the detention center does the state pay? Do they pay any money towards that?
There is some, but it's not a great deal. I'd have to get the numbers for you.
I just can't help but wonder, especially if the state is going to create new rules that we then have to follow. It's in their best interest that these juveniles in the Crossroads home are successful as well, because the more issues they have, the more money it's going to cost to everybody. So I know the unfunded mandate tends to be a popular item, but this seems one area that if they would help invest on the front side, we might really be in a better position to serve better the youth of our community. The last comment I'm going to make is that, and this isn't, you don't have to stand there, Mr.
Right. Thank you for your
Thank
support.
you very much. It seems to me that charging a community for the costs of incarceration based upon the fact that a crime was committed in that community is antiquated and obsolete and just kind of dumb. But maybe there's no other way to do it. Maybe it becomes too complicated with determining residency or if you commit a crime. I understand if you commit a crime in a certain area, that's probably the area where you're going to be incarcerated. So it's hard maybe to get the funding from somewhere else. But if we're going to talk about a joint cooperative agreement amongst our localities for something that we do not have to do, we ought to have the flexibility not to follow an antiquated funding model and create one that makes more sense. And to me, that would be looking at the point of residency as best can be determined by the individual who's in the court system, and then distributing the funds that way. And where there are people where the domicile is questionable, or maybe if it's from outside the area, then it's a collective funding model where we all share in that. But simply to say just because more crimes were committed in Poquoson as opposed to Gloucester, the Poquoson should pay more when those people might not be from Poquoson, to me does not make any sense. And Mr. Wallentish, I know you said that there's a pretty good representation there on who's committing the crime where, but if we're going to invest in the youth of Williamsburg, I'd like to make sure those are the youth we're investing in, and at the same time doing what we can to cooperate with our regional partners to help them invest in their youth.
I completely agree, and it's time that entire, after 30-some years, yes.
And if we've got 5 years to phase this in,
yes,
maybe we could be looking at a new model in year 2 or 3, anticipating it's not going to happen in year 1 because there's probably not time, and we'd have to have more conversations. But I think that's something we ought to strive for.
I might add, it also makes a good case for strong community policing,
Absolutely.
which would also prevent crimes in the locality.
Mayor, I would agree. I think the fact that we have 5 years before we reach the 100% utilization implementation gives us the time to work on defining the residency requirement. I have already talked to the county administrator in York, and he agrees this is something we should look at. So I think that it's something that the commission can consider.
Well, Mr. Wallentish, Mr. Maynor, Mr. Fuller, Ms. Newcomb, we can't thank you enough for the work you do. I'm sure some days it's rewarding, and I'm sure some days it has its challenges, but we really appreciate all the effort that you put forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wallentish. Next background presentation discussion is the introduction of our real estate assessor. So I will just call on Ms. Dameron and let her do the introduction.
Good afternoon, Mayor Freiling and members of City Council. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Derek Green as the City of Williamsburg's real estate assessor. Derek comes to us from Gloucester County, where he served 6 years as the county assessor. When Derek submitted his resume, he attached several letters of recommendation, all glowing, of course, but there was one in particular from a former administrator, Brenda Garten, that spoke positively to his ability to implement software systems, to his focus on customer service, and his ability to work collaboratively with other departments and constitutional officers, all attributes that I think are important. Another of his notable accomplishments was his ability to reduce appeals. In 2006 in Gloucester, they had 4,000 appeals, and in 2010 they had 1,588. 2015 was Derek's first assessment, and he had 160 appeals. That's a 90% reduction. And then in 2017, he had 11 appeals, again, another 93% reduction. And I will state that the Board of Equalization upheld all of the assessments during that year that were appealed. In summary, Derek has 20 years of experience in appraising real estate, 6 of which are in private sector mass appraisal, and the previous 12 years were in real estate assessments for the public sector. On a more personal note, Derek and his wife and 2 children reside in James City County. His children attend the Williamsburg James City County Public Schools. It's my understanding that they really like the area, and his family is very excited that they get to stay here, and they get to stay in the school system here. And of course, Derek is excited that he has a shorter commute. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Derek for him to make a few comments. Join me in welcoming Derek.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. Welcome, Mr. Green.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank City Council, City Manager, Ms. Dameron, and the community for giving me this opportunity. As Ms. Dameron pointed out, I had a 26-mile commute. It's now down to 3.7. So, fantastic. My daughter,
another reduction of 90%, right?
Yeah, that's right. my gas gauge is much more friendly. Right. And my daughter, now I got to take her to school, so I still wake up at the same time, but that's okay. I have big shoes to fill. Mr. Mattson has been here for a significant period of time, I believe 14, 15 years. So obviously the appeals here speak for themselves. I don't think he's in the last 5 years has had more than maybe 10 appeals. So there's a lot of pressure there to maintain that execution. My mission is to introduce technology, but introduce technology in a way that's appropriate, right? There are a lot of powerful tools out there that are at our fingertips that are already available, such as GIS. Just with my first week on the job, my goal by the end of the day, Friday, was to get GIS up and running internally. That way we can actually start to look at the data in the CAMA and actually see it visibly, so Jan and I can actually start to develop some sort of model that we can produce for the next assessment. Obviously, with that in mind, that goal is to produce more credible results to the public, and with that, be more transparent with being our external primary focus. We spent a lot of time in Gloucester. I think part of that reason that 15 to 17 change was so dramatic is we were very transparent. In that time frame, I wrote a manual that actually walked the taxpayer through how the assessment was calculated, and I believe it was 355 pages. But it included all the tables. So it was a complete, this is how we did it, right? I certainly want to tackle that challenge here as well. But if you like, I'd have any questions you'd like me to answer? Or?
Well, thank you, Mr. Green. Before I turn it to my colleagues, I would just like to point out it is still distinctly possible to reduce your commute further if you moved within the city, but we'll leave that to you. Mr. Pons?
I don't have any questions, but welcome. I'm excited to have you aboard and looking forward to all the enhancements that you'll make to the office and certainly enhance communications with the residents so that they better understand what it is that you do and how you derive the numbers is a positive thing. So look forward to having you here for quite a while.
Thank you.
Just want to echo that. Welcome to City of Williamsburg, although I do have Gloucester County is very, very warm to my heart. And when I was in the previous iteration, previous lifetime, working over at Gloucester County on behalf of a senator who sent me there multiple times. But I think you are in a better city and better locality. So welcome, and we're very much looking forward to seeing you fill in John Madison's shoes. So thanks.
Thank you.
And I would like to just say welcome. And I do have questions about how the whole process works.
Sure.
But I'm going to make a separate appointment and come meet with you on that. I know you're really technologically directed, and I'm not, so it might take up too long a time to get into the details. And I would also like to welcome, also say that I ran into a friend of mine this morning who I think was one of your first visits into the neighborhood, and he spoke very highly of his interaction with you and was very pleased that you were so responsive and helped him out. So thank you.
Now, welcome. I had two thoughts where maybe you can help us in the future. We always get the report on, the ratio of sales to assessment, and on an average basis. And then when we look at the details, we might see some outliers in terms of wide swings, and maybe we could just establish a threshold of maybe it's like 10%, where we get a little more information why those ratios were off in those areas. And then also, we've heard in the last Planning Commission public forum sort of different views on, housing or houses in certain neighborhoods near the college next to students. And one comment was that it's raising the value of the house. The other comment was it's lowering the value of the house. So understanding more about those dynamics, I think, would be helpful.
Sure. I think one of the nicest things about integrating technology is you can actually visibly see those patterns. It's one thing to produce a piece of paper that has rows in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, but the nice thing about GIS is you can take those examples and actually map them, and they can see patterns of sales and if it's impacted percentage-wise. And to your first question, the IWO standard is 10%. In theory, if we were perfect, the house would be assessed at what they paid for it, but there's a 10% adjustment that is considered acceptable.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Green. Welcome. We're happy to have you with us, and we look forward to great work to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. This takes us to our next presentation. This is by the Economic Development Authority and their recommendation for the FY19 Downtown Vibrancy implementation. With us today, we have Adam Steele, Chair of the Williamsburg Economic Development Authority. Welcome, Mr. Steele.
Thank you for having me. Greetings to you all. The EDA has been working on the downtown vibrancy study, looking to glean those aspects out of it that we thought we could implement in a short-term basis and then in a longer-term basis. What we're going to talk about today is the idea, if we can get the 9-month window and a limited budget that we had started with of $150,000. So strategically, we broke that down into 4 areas. We were looking at land use and cooperating with the Planning Commission and city staff in targeting strategic conversations about the use of lands and how that might help impact the vibrancy for the downtown area. We were looking at standing up a downtown business association that would include not only retail-facing merchants, but also other professional activity downtown, and working with Colonial Williamsburg to incorporate their Merchant Square Association into a larger organization that might be able to leverage the private sector's interest and assets to combine with the city's efforts and goals in adding to the downtown area. The third thing we looked at was events as drivers of activity and enthusiasm for downtown, both for residents and for visitors. And finally, at some placemaking elements which were featured keenly in the downtown vibrancy studies. A lot of that tends to fall into larger investments on the part of public works, and we try to steer toward those things that made sense for economic development in a short-term basis and maybe away from those things that were bigger investments like streetlights and wider sidewalks and that kind of thing. To address the money, I'll sort of reverse that order. In the placemaking idea, we have assigned overall $50,000 in our proposal to try to accomplish 4 major goals. The first priority of that, in our estimation, was to add some lighting to the downtown area, and as you see on the example we have, that this would be string lighting that we are hoping to string across the streets, probably based on poles rather than trying to get every property owner in the targeted area to agree. But we're working with a couple of electrical contractors to give us a proposal. The targeted area initially is the 2 blocks of Prince George Street that run from Henry down to the Triangle Building. We believe not only is that the focus of a great number of food and beverage and retail outlets that would draw people to downtown, it's also a great pilot project. If it works, we can continue to work with Colonial Williamsburg on Henry Street with the shops on the far side of Duke of Gloucester Street to further enhance the identity of the area as a whole. We'd like to, as was featured in the Downtown Vibrancy Study, we'd like to add unified looking planters and benches throughout the area. We also want to target holiday decorations, and we're going to be working with the city staff that already do that and with Colonial Williamsburg to try to get a unified look for the entire area, and we think we can leverage the expense and programs that are already in place without much further investment to make all that look uniform throughout the downtown area. And finally, in placemaking, we want to take a small part of our budget and devoted $10,000 in that to a pop-up kiosk. This would be a mobile and reusable facilities so that we could, for instance, offer to an entrepreneurial-minded individual the chance to come and set up somewhere in the downtown area and in the summertime sell popsicles outside the library, or in the fall sell, just to try a different retail environment for different entrepreneurs at different time. We have not yet established time windows on how that would work or the application process, but we are trying to set aside the funding to make that purchase while we work on those details. The other big part of the budget that we looked at was events. We wanted to use $50,000 of our budget that you have assigned for us to target towards enhancing existing events while still maintaining the opportunity to work with folks that might have a new proposal to bring forward. To do that, we've targeted a handful of events that we might be able to make a leveraged improvement where our money would, rather than be used for operational expenses of an existing thing, rather enhance that existing event to take it to the next level, which would allow better PR, more advertising and marketing promotional stuff for Bob Harris and his crew to bring out to the public. And also maybe enhance the attendance of those events. And those were primarily an occasion for the arts. I've met with Stuart Harnberger about that. When this effort got underway, there was not sufficient time to make the right strategic investment of our funds for this year's event, as that's obviously already behind us. But we are targeting 2019 and trying to come up with the ways in which the EDA might help them dramatically change the look and feel of their weekend's promotions with a new aspect that would be responsible, or we would be funded rather, by the EDA's contribution. We are looking at a New Year's Eve celebration, and I'm working with Culture Fix to try to bring downtown interested parties to bear. We've had a couple of meetings on that. We're looking at the Winter Blues Jazz Festival, again, using the funding to not just pay the operational costs for the event, but to leverage that to add an additional evening's entertainment or to dramatically upgrade the type of artist we're able to search for because of the budget available. We're working with several member groups, community members that already have events on a weekend at the end of April There is already a beer festival in town. It's already the Spring Arts Weekend in downtown, and it is the Meals on Wheels annual largest fundraiser. We're trying to bring all three of those events under a dramatically larger tent outside this building. And there is somewhere here. Oh, that's okay. Sorry, I'm gotten behind. Had my slides. So we're looking to bring a tent like we use for the Funhouse Fest, to bring that tent to fill this entire block. That would involve staging to fill the street so that it would be one level from the community building all the way through to the library pavilion outside. And that same facility would be used for all three events. The Meals on Wheels event on Friday, Culture Fix would be looking to do a food and beverage daytime event as a new item on Saturday. The beer festival and the art in the park would all both be on Sunday, and we would try to tie all those things into this facility, and that wouldn't happen without our funding. We are looking at a collaborative effort with Colonial Williamsburg to try to enhance their July 4th celebrations. Not really the fireworks side of that, but the analysis that Colonial Williamsburg is, or at least the preliminary conversations that we've been involved with, have been that they believe they can take a stronger public relations role with the 4th of July and really own that holiday in terms of public appearance. And we believe that's the case as well, that Williamsburg is a pivotal part of that conversation. And we'd like to be able to help them by adding additional activity outside of fireworks that could make a dramatic difference and include and invite people to stay longer and make Williamsburg a destination for that national holiday. And then finally, the last thing we're looking to create would be to work with the stakeholders in the area to use the Triangle Building parking lot. And there was we'd like to create a tailgate event of sorts, and that's as yet undefined because we have a little bit of time ahead of us. But we want to get the stakeholders involved and figure out how we might be able to leverage the fact that we are a small college town and that there's a great deal of alumni support. If we could find a way to do that in a community-based way that isn't taking anything away from what the delis and their areas do right by the stadium, but maybe offer some entertainment activity for those people who've come to town for the football games and capitalize on that camaraderie and goodwill that a college town provides. The final piece of the budget would be the Downtown Business Association. We believe there are two aspects for funding of that, and we've assigned $40,000 in the budget to that. First would be the legal fees associated with standing up a 501c6 organization that would be able to work with the city to represent the businesses and engage with the city in downtown events. But also we want to provide annual funding, at least in the beginning, to help with staffing for that organization. As you all know, if there's no staff person behind it, you can have the best intentions in the world, but very little is going to happen if you're relying on 100% volunteer effort. That's the recap of where we are to date. Again, we were looking to leverage $150,000 as effectively as possible, and we have about a 9-month window to try to bring that to your attention and deliver some results for you so that by July we have a strong track record and the ability to look at further investment in downtown vibrancy.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I come to my colleagues for comments or questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Steele. I think we're all very excited about some of the things that you talked about. Certainly, we've gone through this downtown vibrancy study, and there's some aspects of it that we need to start implementing. Otherwise, we just stick this study on the shelf, and that's a waste of resources. And I think we all agree that there's untapped things that we could be doing to really, make this what is already, a cool place to be even, stronger destination and attract more people to spend more dollars and have a good time. So I look forward to seeing some of these things happen. I think one of the things maybe you didn't touch too much on was the signage in the area. I guess we'd have some directional signage.
Right, it is definitely on our list. Our feeling was that for a 9-month window, that's going to be a little bit more involved issue, and it's going to involve getting with Public Works a little bit more. I should say there's a number of priorities that didn't make it into that for that reason. We think parking is a driving issue for economic development downtown and for downtown vibrancy specifically. but it is a slightly thornier issue and not something that falls clearly within the EDA's mandate alone. These are the things that I presented to you are the kinds of things that we think that we can accomplish on that short-term basis with limited funding. And then we absolutely intend to dig into these thornier issues like signage, parking, direction for parking, those kinds of things.
And so I think, to the thorny issues, that some of the logistics of, the overhead lights, that to me, just looking at it, maybe seeming a little ambitious, and maybe there's other ways to accomplish something that would be equally as meaningful without having to string across the street, which requires infrastructure.
And like I said, we're looking for proposals from a couple of lighting firms that have done these in Hampton and Phoebus, and if they can come up with a real implementation plan that we believe meets our criteria for safety and for continuity and for the overall aesthetic, we're going to bring that to you and show you what they've got.
And to that, I think the area that you've identified is to put these extra lights really ought to go to the end of the Triangle building across Armstead, because so often people, it used to be that they'd get to the corner boundary where Turvis Tumbler is and say, "What's down there? I'm not going." Let's not create that again.
And that, again, will largely be dependent upon the proposal and the budget.
Sure.
So if they come back with us, we'd like to go a lot further. It really depends on how much money we can
More money, the better
stretch it.
things are,
Right.
no question. Then the logistics of this pop-up kiosk, kind of makes me wonder who would own it, where it would be stored, who would tow it, who would repair it, who would insure it, and who would operate it, and who manages all that, and maybe the staff person does that, and so there's a lot of logistical things there that I'm curious about. And
Sure. We envision that being part of the EDA would make the original investment, and then our hope is that asset could be turned over to that downtown business association, and that we could have an approved application process for somebody to bring forward an entrepreneurial idea, and that we work with that group and with the city to figure out issues like maintenance and housing, because we really don't have that sorted out yet.
And so then to this downtown association, one of the things that concerns me about that is, as you know well, there's a lot of silos in town, and I hate to think that we would participate in creating another silo that may, run afoul with the Merchant Square Association, even though they may be, commingling, but there's. And then you got staff and maybe not working for this other. So I'm just concerned about the unintended consequences of that, and so. I think that that's going to require a great deal of thinking about and understanding the process, and maybe are there other ways that we can accomplish something similar?
Well, it's certainly concerns that are well-founded. We did have preliminary meetings with Jeff Duncan at Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. He is excited about turning over that kind of functionality from Colonial Williamsburg's wheelhouse into ours. I think they're interested in still maintaining the fiduciary angle that they have with their tenants about common area maintenance and those types of things. But I think he sees value, and on behalf of the foundation, sees value in the community acting as a whole, and I think they'd like to step back from that day-to-day operation of business concerns and focus more on their tenant concerns as opposed to marketing issues, sales, festivals, those kinds of things that Merchant Square tenants want to be involved in, but it's going to be difficult to encourage them to join yet another silo or another organization, as you say, because they're already contributing dues here. And we heard willingness from the foundation to both share in that decision-making process, but also in the funds raising. So maybe those tenants can be business members, and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation sort of pays for their membership as part of that financial package. Rick Overy met with them, and so he was very positive about the direction of that conversation, and we'll be happy to bring to you as that moves forward more details.
That's all I have for now, but thank you for your presentation.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Seeley, for coming today and presenting on behalf of EDA. It's exciting that the EDA has taken the initiative and really taken the consultants' report and think boldly and imagining and re-envisioning our space in downtown vibrancy. So that's very much greatly appreciated. And there's a lot to like in this proposal. I think one thing that I don't know if you had noted before, but certain of these criteria that you have put in would meet the Main Street program. And I know from many localities in Virginia, they have benefited greatly from investment from the state. So that's a great, promising direction to take, and I commend the EDA and staff for taking that direction as well. Every year I get the governor's grant reports, and it's just a lot of money that they go out towards investing those main streets, and I think that's important that you guys keep that as a priority. So thank you for that. Just wanted to clarify some certain things. I think I'm going to go between you and then maybe to Mr. Trivett and maybe members of staff, just so that I can understand a little bit better about what the process is like moving from here. My general impression from the downtown consultants' reports when they had come in a few months last year, a few months ago, was that the initial 150 would be utilized greater towards streetscape improvements, enhancements. I know there were some concerns about seatability around the greater downtown area, and not just confined to Merchant Square. So that's kind of where I was thinking towards, but I'm not a member of the EDA, so it matters not what the legislative intent was when we approved the budget. But in terms of the pop-up pavilion, I do share some concerns with what Vice Mayor Pons had mentioned. I was just curious, kind of scope that out a little bit more. When the EDA had proposed this idea of the pop-up pavilion, which it was a big element within the consultants' reports, was there an additional, maybe an initial return on investment analysis based on what the pavilion would produce? Or?
No, we've not done any of that legwork to date, and I think that's part of the organizational stuff. We'll have to dedicate some resources to.
Sure, today's just a proposal, so I'm just curious to see what the steps.
We've not done anything about the criteria that would be involved in application or the return we would like to see from a successful operator.
Sure. And I guess for Michelle, I think Doug had already mentioned this part already, but would this pop-up pavilion be EDA owned? I guess it'll be city owned, right? Is that the assumption that we're operating under? Or is there an opportunity for encouraging maybe a private entrepreneur that wants to do also a pop-up pavilion that this grant may also be
So this proposal, and Adam can correct me if he is it the EDA purchased this to get this concept started? Mm-hmm. And the hope is that a business association would eventually, it would fold under them. But initially it would be the EDA, so not the city, the EDA, and then they would do requests for entrepreneurs to come use it.
Understood.
So the idea is not just the direct return on investment, what can we lease this for? As important is to bring in new and different things for people to taste and eat and purchase and experience as part of that vibrancy and excitement in downtown that our consultant said was lacking, that we're a bit staid. So it's to bring in some exciting things more than make money on leasing a kiosk.
Okay.
Of course, the city will receive sales and meals tax from whatever business comes in, but it's not about making money by leasing out the kiosk.
Okay. No, then thank you for that. Also, I guess, just going back real quickly, in terms of grants to leverage special events, I'm just curious, where did the EDA arrive at with the $50,000? Has that been?
We were looking at the amount of money that, with our collective experience, it would take to significantly make a difference.
Right.
That if we thought we couldn't actively improve or get involved with more than a handful of events during the year. We have a lot that go on downtown, right, but that we couldn't get really invested in more than 4 or 5 ongoing events, and that in order to change the way an event looks and feels to the public that already has a $50,000 or $60,000 operating budget, or in the case of the Winter Blues Jazz Festival or Occasion for the Arts, right, dramatically more than that. If you do not have in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000 to effect some change, right, you're not going to be able to make a dramatic impact that would be a significant change. I'm sure it would enhance the experience for the operator and possibly for guests, but we want to do something that would be visibly dramatic.
Understood, and thank you for that explanation. In terms of the street enhancements for Drew, if they wanted to do something like the overhead light, and I'll reserve judgment on that until there's, I guess, a more concrete proposal based on what you're finding out with other companies and vendors, would that have to go through any zoning process with us? I mean, is that a by right use? I don't know if I'm using the term right. Would they have to go?
It depends on what's proposed.
Okay.
Traditionally, things that are in the right-of-way have not had to go through a ARB process or anything like that. If it's attached to the buildings, then it might need ARB review, but I don't think there would need to be any kind of a zoning approval necessarily.
Okay, just wondering. And in terms of the Downtown Business Association, I think Vice Mayor Pons had already alluded to this, but the idea is that this will be separate from Merchant Square, right? This
Correct.
will be its own. Now, is there any rationale? I know other localities like Norfolk, for example, they went ahead with the business improvement districts, and they utilized the economic incentives that the state allowed that locality to do. Was there any rationale in terms of moving forward with this Downtown Business Association? Had the EDA contemplated maybe in the future of utilizing something like a bid? Because that would make sense.
I'll have to plead a little bit of municipal ignorance on I'm aware of that, but I'm not quite sure of the differences. My understanding was we were looking at a downtown business association as an alternative to that, not an exclusive solution, but that this would be a way we could move forward with the private sector involved as opposed to a public sector driven. But Michelle, please fill me.
Exactly right, Adam. So the thought here was to have it more private sector driven and to start with this opportunity that not only this downtown vibrancy plan gives us, but the openness of Colonial Williamsburg to discuss this at this moment in time is very unique. So having a Merchant Square open to discussing a broader organization that encompasses the whole downtown, and that was what our vibrancy plan wanted as well. This was a moment in time when we could discuss that being a private-public partnership to do that. A bid is always an option to raise more funds or to do it if the private sector players can't figure it out themselves. The bid is certainly a tool that the city can use to set that up and organize it. And to Doug's earlier point, it's a way to fairly collect the resources and the funds needed from the businesses who will benefit from it in a bid. So it's certainly an option. It was mentioned in the plan. I think the EDA wanted a little softer approach this first year in terms of if the private sector will stand up and see this as important with a little bit of encouragement and match funding. Kind of the Main Street model is what we were going for. To move forward this year, now was the time to attempt that.
Right, and the reason why I brought that up, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that mostly when you establish bids, you establish a downtown association or council. So that's what Norfolk has in its downtown. They have a downtown council, which operates as a 501c6 as well, or some sort of entity like that. So
exactly.
That's why I thought maybe there's that presumption that maybe moving forward there would be kind of go in that direction. So I was just kind of curious to.
And maybe I should explain what a bid is. So
if you don't mind, yeah.
A business improvement district is a tool that can be used in Virginia to designate a certain area, in this case it would be downtown, and collect revenue from the businesses and property owners within that area, so collected taxes beyond what other areas of the city are paying that are used then to fund things that directly benefit that area. So the business improvement district tax revenue might pay for the trash cans that are used in that area. It may pay for more police assistance for special events. So it's things that will be collected just from those businesses, and then those resources used just to benefit those businesses, marketing events. And so it's a very common, especially in larger cities, a very common tool, and many Main Street communities use it as well.
And I guess final question. Two quick parts to it. One, for the Downtown Vibrancy Coordinator, I guess the name could speak for itself, but perhaps, maybe you could explain a little bit more about what that particular person would do in terms of that role with the coordinator. But also, as part of the answer to that question, don't we have that capacity already where we wouldn't have to hire another person to do it? Maybe we could do it within our current staff capacity as well.
So our read on that was to follow the Main Street model that, and again, the Main Street is a program that you can look up online, and we're actually going to have a briefing in the coming months from the Main Street folks to come in town and tell us how what we're doing dovetails with what they do and how we might possibly become a member of that program looking forward. That's just undecided as yet. But they're very clear that if you don't have a dedicated person working in this department, you end up not affecting the change that you want. Their experience is pretty broad nationally, and they've got a lot of documentation to back it up. Our thought was that what we wanted to do was provide matching funding and maybe a little more than 50-50 funding at the first stage of standing up this council. We believe that eventually that person ought to be the executive director of this business council. And to the extent that the EDA will continue to be invested in the business community being successful, we might continue with some ongoing funding to help with that position. But the idea is that this would be above and beyond the scope that Michelle and Yuri have. We don't want them to get involved in negotiating in weekly or monthly meetings with these different event people. But we do believe that someone representing this kind of investment should be involved in those meetings so that we can have the right impact as we move forward. So our thought was to use some of this money to leverage the effectiveness of standing up this organization so that as the businesses who are going to be asked to pay dues to join get on board, they will see immediate results from somebody who's focused and goal-oriented as opposed to another volunteer board where they're offering their own services to serve in a volunteer capacity.
Thank you.
Is that all?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, I have a few questions and comments, and I'll try to not go on too long, but having attended some of the meetings, I just wanted to bring out a little bit more that I had sort of gleaned from the meetings. And I think first and foremost, it's to recognize that this $150,000 is for this year and to affect change fairly quickly. And it wasn't to try to address all of the suggestions that the consultants had made. For one thing, we had talked about placemaking with benches and signage and trash cans and things like that. And I think it was felt it was a little premature to do that because we don't know exactly where the activity nodes are going to be, and with some of the other changes that are projected, what might be selected today could change in the next 6 months. Was that not correct?
Right. There are some strategic goals within their plan that require decisions to be made about where you want, and these go to sort of the land use questions that we addressed that we're going to be working with planning to talk about in the future. The city is going to have to, as a community, going to have to make some decisions about where they want some of this activity to be located. And what we didn't want to do was put the cart before the horse. We don't want to invest in benches and lighting and signage in a place that's not going to be the center of that activity. If the city's then going to make a significant investment in an intersection 1 block away, we think that's not necessarily the best use of public funds, that we should wait, use our money to make a substantive impact in the short term while leaving all of our options open for those more strategic goals.
And to that extent, I think that was the reason for the string lights, not only to do something that would be fairly soon, but also to highlight what I think Rick Overy called the restaurant arc that's already in place and won't really change that much, but could expand, and to create sort of a path from even the delis all the way over to the museum area when it's finished initially. But I think there was also comments made at the meeting about being sure that we get the right approach, whether it be through the right vendor, the types of lights, how they would be affixed and things like that. And that we wanted this to occur fairly soon, but we also wanted to ensure that there was quality over quickness, so to speak.
That's exactly right. In fact, the conversations I had with the vendors, I tried to stress the fact that we are open to the idea of a temporary installation if that was their experience, because we want to make sure that when the money that we spend and when we make that investment, that we've made it correctly, that the stakeholders involved agree that this is a look and feel that we like, and that the end result is the change that we're looking for. One of the points that's in the Downtown Vibrancy Study was that our area, in addition, as Michelle said, to being somewhat static, is also very dark. and that it was discouraging both to our downtown residents, to visitors, but particularly to college students, that they did not feel comfortable walking around our downtown area because there was insufficient ambient lighting. So we thought that a 2-block area that included, and I'm going to defer to Rick here, I think it's 21 establishments that serve something to eat or drink, which means you could pop into the Peanut Shop or Kilwins or Oishi, or you don't even have to make a dinner reservation. There's so much activity that if we can keep the comfort level of our residents, our visitors, and our college community really high about engaging with our downtown area, the economic spin-off from that comfort should be dramatic and should be very, very trackable.
And then to the events, I can personally attest to the value of sort of bumping up. I went to the kickoff party for the occasion for the arts on Friday night, and they had a fabulous band, but there were hardly anybody there to. Dr. Cranville was there, and but there weren't enough people to really experience the band and the food and the whole vibe before the weekend started. And perhaps a little bit more into that would be something to expand the
and
weekend.
That was the nature of the conversation we had with Mr. Honenberger, who's the chairman of that organization, is to say we want to make sure that when we partner with you on an event like this, that we're doing so in a way that strategically changes the impact it's having with the public. So that if we're your Friday night partner, we want to make sure that we have not only a great event with a great band, but that we also are successful in drawing a big crowd so that people can see the 50-year history and the investment this group has made and the kind of excitement and energy that it brings to the downtown area.
And I think that was one thing that was also indicated with the Funhouse Fest by having a high draw because with Allison Krauss is that, you know, she was what brought people there, and if we can bump up the talent a little bit for some of these events, that it'll draw people from a wider range. And last on the pop-up kiosk, I guess another option possibly would be to look at, other than just, you know, to have a little bit more flexibility with that. I guess I was envisioning that it would be an entrepreneur that might bring something to the city, and that it could be a variety of different options to vitalize the area, as opposed to a little cart or a stand that they would have to fill. I noticed I was at Second Sunday, and there was one of the coffee vendors was there, and they brought their own pop-up sort of tent with them. And so I think that, you know, maybe relook at a little bit of cart as opposed to just providing maybe some grant money to people who would want to come and bring their own.
Yeah, I think that would take a little bit of research on our part to find out what vendors, what types of people are out there, and how we might let them know that if we have a program like that, how do you make that known to those vendors so that they can come make that application? I wouldn't want to set money aside and watch it
not be
sit
used
in a bank account and not get used.
Right.
On the other hand, if we could leverage a little bit of grant money on our side to bring someone who's already made a big investment in some really fun retail mobile establishment and bring it here, sure, wide open to that.
And the last thing I'll mention is included in the packet of information that was on our agenda was the letter that was sent to the Planning Commission from the EDA, sort of addressing some of these concerns. So that part has been done to with the comp plan and zoning and things like that.
And we really look at that as a first step. We
Right.
think this conversation is going to be ongoing. We're so grateful to have Jeffrey Klee sitting on our board with us to meet with us every month. It has been an invaluable asset, and so we look forward both to his insight, but also to having somebody from our organization sitting on planning commission meetings so that we can have that dialogue back and forth and make sure that we're providing the information they might need as they make their strategic plans, and that if they have questions, you know, we're there to answer them.
Thank you.
Two comments. One is several of our boards and commissions have received application in terms of activating Goodwin Square, the parking area behind the Goodwin building. And I would think it might be prudent to see if there are going to be any asks there for funding, and maybe this would be a source for some of that funding. The second thing is I would not support putting poles up on Prince George Street. I just don't think that there's enough space for that. And I think the city has spent a lot of money trying to take down poles, and I don't think we should be putting them up now.
Certainly can recognize that, and I'm looking forward then to sort of address that indirectly, looking forward to seeing the proposals from these commercial installers. Both of the people I spoke to in the last 3 or 4 days have said they have done both, attached to buildings as well as poles. And I think that the tougher lift would be maybe a charm offensive we'd have to go on with all our property owners to have them understand the vision and share in that, as well as making sure that we've handled the legal side of indemnification so that when you are using private property for a public purpose, that we find a way to hold the right parties accountable, and that's way out of my pay grade. So, but your point's well taken, and we're not unaware of the aesthetic needs that we've got to preserve that downtown look that we've worked so hard to create.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Let me just add on to a couple of points my colleagues have made. I'm a big fan of the lighting concept. I like the idea of light creating a degree of comfort and safety for people at night. It tells people we're open for business. It can create an additional sense of energy somewhere. As with some of my colleagues, and Mr. Maslin mentioned it particularly, not a big fan of poles in the streets. And I'm not even sure this is the right kind of lighting. So I look forward to whatever proposal can come back from anybody who can provide the lighting, because we also don't want it to be a visual detraction during the day. It's one thing in a mall setting or somewhere that's enclosed and people don't really look around that much, but when people walk up and down the streets of Williamsburg, they're looking all around, particularly at the architecture and the charm of the buildings on the streets. And so finding a way to illuminate the area without taking away from that aesthetic, to me, would be a critical part of this. So I look forward to whatever you can bring back on that. I think the idea of unified planters and benches as a longer-term focus is terrific, and I applaud that. Like my colleagues, I think signage is important. I know that you do too. But let's not get too focused on hard signage as opposed to what we might be able to do electronically or interactively to guide people where they want to go. And I know this is going to be a long conversation to get to that end point. Two more things. The pop-up kiosk, I know it's still a work in progress. Give some consideration to the idea, if the EDA is going to buy a facility like this, that you find a way to lease it to somebody who can support the entrepreneurs through delivering it, setting it up, taking it down, storing it in the way the EDA of the city does not have the capacity to do. But it might be possible for some nominal amount that you might find somebody who would lease it for whatever the city attorney says we would have to do in order to do that, but so that the responsibility for it comes off our plates. And the last thing is, the Downtown Merchants Association, or whatever we're going to call that, this might be a semantic issue, but you keep talking about following the Main Street model. What I would encourage us to do is stop talking about a downtown business association and start talking about adopting the Main Street America program. And this is our first step towards doing that and bringing somebody on board who can help us directly organize with them, and maybe the initial step is just to explore it and view what would be necessary for implementation. But I'm not comfortable necessarily with the city getting in the business of creating associations, just like we would not create neighborhood associations. Those need to happen within the neighborhoods. Business districts can have their own business associations, but if there's something we can do to establish a thriving Main Street America program and then take advantage of those resources with national experience and the benefits that they can bring to bear to that, I think it would be easier to get all the merchants interested, and it becomes something more productive for the Merchant Square Association to join in and do. That's just my opinion. I'm not trying to give...
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I think that's nice to hear. I think that Mr. Witt and I are both big fans of that program. That's why we've invited them to come speak to us before the end of the year. And we are really looking forward to hearing how that works. I believe there's been some initial outreach to them already about being listed as a participating member of that organization so that we're eligible for that kind of thing. There are stages you have to go through. We've taken that first step of reaching out to them to join that organization, and I think we're looking forward to hearing that. I can't commit to that without hearing more from them about what that involves. Or we'd like to be able to come back and report to you that we've done our due diligence, that this is a program that fits what we're doing ideally or with certain modifications, and then we'd like to be able to come back and look for your blessing on that.
Well, on behalf of all my colleagues, thank you and the EDA for all the work that you're doing. We talk a lot about downtown vibrancy. Now we're looking forward to actually seeing the results of the implementation of this study, and we just are thankful that you all are giving it such a careful and close look.
Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. We'll come back.
Thank you, sir. We now come. Ms. Ramsey was asking if we need to.
Supposed to take any action?
Well, I mean, there was some, in the agenda item summary, there was a request for action, but I don't know if the EDA would prefer just to take this kind of feedback back and tweak the proposal a little bit and then try again, or what would you like us to do, Ms. DeWitt?
Any action you could tell the EDA to go forward with, they'd be very appreciative. The clock's ticking on this fiscal year. Maybe your action is to tell them to go back and restudy and come back, or maybe there are parts you're willing to say, you bless this.
Let me suggest an action and see what my colleagues feel about that. I think we would encourage the EDA, chime in if you disagree, to continue to explore each of these items and to come back with some more concrete information when you have some proposals from the lighting company, when you have some information on how the pop-up kiosk might work, and after you've had your interview with the Main Street America people. Because I think conceptually it's all good, but I think it'd just be helpful for us to understand a little better.
The only one that I might be willing to go forward would be grants to leverage for special events, because I feel confident with the events that are sort of already in place that they want to enhance, and particularly with things moving forward like for New Year's Eve and for the Jazz Blues Festival.
Is it possible through the additional fact-finding that some of the figures may be changed? I mean, is that not a reasonable thing to think? So maybe some of the funding mechanisms and recommendations may change by the time the next recommendation comes. I mean, I just don't want to.
That's true.
I just don't want to, you know.
So I think one thing, just to help clarify, the mechanics of this is that the council set aside $150,000 to do this implementation, but the council retained that funding as opposed to transferring it to the EDA. So the process is the EDA comes and makes a proposal, and the council agrees with the proposal so that they can have access to the funding. And that was the purpose of today. It sounds like what I'm hearing, there's some things that need to be, questions that still need to be answered before you're comfortable in letting all that money go. The other thing that I would mention is regarding the event specifically, the convenience of having the EDA administer a program like that is that they are able to use their existing performance agreement process to make sure that you get the kind of reporting you're interested in on how the funding was used and what the results were. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Additionally, I think to take some of the pressure off of the chairman, the haste in trying to get something approved and moving ahead, expending the $150,000 that's in the current year's budget, is so that in January, when Barbara and I start working on a new budget, they can feel comfortable in requesting an additional $150,000 in the next fiscal year, perhaps even more, to take another more grand step toward vibrancy implementation. And so maybe if the chairman were to hear that the council thought that this was moving in the right direction to set the stage for that to be approved, it might take some of the pressure off of the committee to get this done so quickly.
So I want to give them the green light on certain aspects. I think that special events and some of the street enhancements, the unification of the benches and the planters, I think all those things are positive steps. Again, my concerns are I'd like to see what the lighting looks like, see what those proposals look like. I think we all have some questions about that, and I still have some questions about the Downtown Vibrancy Coordinator and the association. So subtracted out a portion, like $40,000 for that portion of it, and then release, guys are okay with the pop-up pavilion, the grants to leverage special events, that's $60,000, and then a portion of the street enhancements to do some of the project work, the Christmas decorations, those types of things.
I'm happy to do that too. Yeah, I was just posing that question conceptually, but yeah.
We don't know at this time what the Christmas sort of expanding and enhancing the Christmas decorations portion will cost, because all of that, I think, is rolled into street enhancements, the lights, the Christmas decor, and
Create an arbitrary number,
So-
$15,000 for street enhancements.
Can I just jump? I'm completely comfortable with telling them to go ahead with the event grant program.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too.
I'm not at all discouraged by the others. There are just a couple things we'd like some more information on. I totally understand your encouragement to get the EDA moving so that they can demonstrate what they've done, but I think we know the path they're going down. So you don't have to spend the money tomorrow in order to come back for next year, as long as we know that you're pursuing things and doing it in a careful and thoughtful way to look out for the interests of the entire community and take some input from folks.
I apologize for abandoning the podium.
Could you come right here? Or
Perhaps too quickly. What I would ask is that some of the events that we're talking about are going to take place in the next 90 days.
Right.
And if we don't come report back to you for 30 days, we may not be able to make commitments on some of the things like a New Year's Eve contract, if there is such a thing to be worked out. Obviously, we would work with city staff to make sure whatever arrangements we're getting involved in are blessed, but if you would find a way to release some portion of funding, that would make us feel more comfortable, because we don't have a lot in the way of reserve capital, that we could sign an agreement or at least enter into a verbal agreement with some of these event organizers that we could deliver the funding that they've asked for.
I don't hear any hesitation from anybody on that.
I think we're good
Mr.
on
Masden, are you
this.
good?
50,000 is good.
Yeah.
For the,
If we can have a sort of a first tranche of
Yes.
$50,000 and move forward, that'd be fantastic.
Do
We'll
we
come
need to
back
do
to you.
anything formal?
Yeah.
I think the only thing that
The
is
city attorney's.
Well, so you have an action item on the agenda and for Monday, which we typically don't do on Monday.
Correct.
We typically do these on Thursday. And so I suggest that there is a motion to approve whatever part of this that you want to approve on Thursday's agenda. And that's when you adopt
Approve
that
it on
motion.
Thursday.
That sounds great. We have a meeting on Wednesday. I'll report out to our organization, our group, and let them know where we stand and that you're eager to hear more detail on the things that you've asked about.
So you're suggesting that we add this to Thursday's agenda
Yes.
as an action item?
Yes.
and the fact that we would move to authorize the 50,000 for the special events.
Yes.
Okay,
Does that work,
sounds good to
Mr.
me.
Stevens?
It works for me. I might have Michelle reach out to Chris or somebody for that action item once we hear back about the timing of Christmas decorations and the
Okay.
city's involvement in that. But it would be a small change, not a dramatic change. So,
Sure.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you.
thank you.
That makes sense.
We have one more background presentation. Presentation of ordinance to form Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facilities Authority, or EVRIFA. Mr. Witt, did I say that correctly, EVRIFA, or is it EVRIFA?
RIFA. No, RIFA.
Gosh,
Why does
Yeah,
it have
RIFA.
EV?
because that's on
Pardon?
Oh, it's on our agenda, it's Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facility Authority.
EV RIFA.
Okay.
I'm sure it will become a RIFA or something at some point, but Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you. At the end of this presentation, you will know more than you ever thought you would about RIFAs, which is a Regional Industrial Facility Authority. So I'm going to set up the presentation, and then Mr. Todd Lynn, the attorney that's working with the region on this, will explain a RIFA and be able to answer questions to you. I'll start with last year at this time. It was actually October 14th of last year is when the City Council adopted a resolution to support the Regional Unmanned Systems Effort Testing Facility for a Go Virginia grant. We did that project with Gloucester County, York County, James City County, the City of Poquoson, Newport News, and Hampton. So that was a regional effort that went after Go Virginia funding. In February, we received that funding, which was very exciting. The first step of that funding was to create a regional industrial facility authority in order to operate a regional economic development effort. So a RIFA has similar authority as an economic development authority. They can own property, lease it, do economic development projects, but it allows it to do it regionally. And there's no RIFAs on the eastern part of the state, so we're really leading the way with the Eastern Virginia RIFA. There are many on the western part of the state, and they're commonly used to create an industrial park. And you've heard of revenue sharing in Virginia and the difficulties around that. Well, a RIFA allows you to do that legally, to enter into these agreements, to share in the cost and the revenue sharing of a regional economic development project. So this RIFA is designed so that different projects can happen under it. So all these localities are forming the RIFA, but then you decide project by project whether you want to come in and enter into it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit generally about why would Williamsburg join a RIFA. I've already explained this is a tool that's provided in the state code to allow revenue sharing, which is an exciting way. You talked about return on investment earlier. It's a way to really analyze that and whether you want to be part of a regional economic development effort. Our city is 9 square miles, and because of the moratorium and annexation, we're landlocked and we're close to build out. So this is an opportunity for us to enjoy a diversified tax base outside of the city limits, or something could even happen within the city limits, but to work with our neighbors on that so we can have that revenue sharing across the locality lines. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is an option to participate in future regional cost and revenue sharing projects. It in no way obligates us, but it allows us that opportunity as regional projects come forward. So I will now ask Todd Lynn to come forward, and he's going to walk you through all the details of this and can answer questions. He's doing this for he and Steve Mead from Patton, Warnham, Hatton, and Diamondstein. Are y'all is it PWHD yet? But you still use all the names?
PWHD, we still use all the names.
Okay. The official, so yes. PWHD. Well, I'll turn it over to Todd to walk you through this, and what will happen is an ordinance is required for this creation from all the localities, and that's on your Thursday agenda.
Welcome, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of council. As Michelle indicated, my name is Todd Lynn with Patton, Warnham, Hatton, and Diamondstein. I'm here representing the Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Development Authority. My purpose here today is to provide you an update on certain substantive elements of the RIFA, as we call it. We have a PowerPoint presentation for you that to walk through certain of those elements. If I can figure this out, then we'll be doing good. The first slide we have is the statutory authority for the RIFA. The statute was passed back in 1997 and enables localities to cooperate in the development, ownership, and operation of facilities. The purpose for a RIFA is to enable localities to combine resources to develop facilities that an individual locality may not otherwise be able to develop. I'll mention as well that although it's a regional industrial development authority, the statutory authority enables the RIFA to develop residential, commercial, office, and recreational projects. It's not limited to industrial facilities. The RIFA is created by each of the participating localities passing concurrent resolutions that will approve the initial organizational documents of the RIFA, and as well just agree to participate in the RIFA. Once those ordinances are passed, they're filed with the Secretary of the Commonwealth, who will issue a certificate that memorializes the creation of the RIFA. From that point going forward, the key substance, I think, of the RIFA, as Michelle indicated, is our participation agreements. It's really an opportunity for the City of Williamsburg and the other participating localities to participate in future projects, but not an obligation. Those participation opportunities will be affected through individual participation agreements, and it's anticipated that each project will be memorialized with an individual participation agreement. The initial project, as indicated, that's planned, of course, is the Unmanned Systems Project using the initial Go Virginia funding. I think Michelle's outlined for us the initial proposed RIFA members, Gloucester, Hampton, James City County, Newport News, Pocono, and Williamsburg, and York County. RIFA's pretty flexible in that additional localities can be involved or added to the RIFA after the fact. It's simply a majority vote of the Board of Directors of the RIFA and the passage by that locality of an ordinance to participate. The governing board of the RIFA is a board of directors. Each locality will appoint 2 members to the board of directors. One of those board members is required to be a member of your governing body. The other board member is at your discretion. As a recommendation among the various economic development directors that are working on this, that the second board member be a member of your economic development authority. That's purely a recommendation and not in any way mandatory. There's a secondary recommendation that you have 2 alternate board members that you can appoint, and that one of those be your economic development director. Again, just a recommendation of the group as a whole, but not a binding obligation. The only real obligation is that one of the board members, of course, be a member of your governing body, your city council, and that a second board member to simply be a resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia that you elect. As Michelle indicated, there's really no obligation to your participation in the RIFA. It's not anticipated that there'll be any ongoing dues. There's authority to create dues, but the city would have to, as would all of the other localities, agree to those dues. The funding has already been committed for the creation of the RIFA, and participation in individual projects will be purely optional going forward. So even though you may pass the ordinance to participate in the RIFA, you're not required to fund or participate in any project that the RIFA may pursue. The RIFA will, of course, file an annual report with each of the localities promptly following the close of the fiscal year, including a detailed audit, a detailed financial report. As we've addressed somewhat already, projects will be undertaken through participation agreements. Participation is optional, and each participation agreement for each project will be negotiated. So whether or not the city, if it elects to pass the ordinance to participate, chooses to participate in a particular project, it'll be on whatever negotiated terms the city's willing to participate and not participate if that's the decision. There's the flexibility as well in the statute for those projects and those participation agreements to involve non-localities, other organizations that may be important to the development of a particular facility. The heart of the RIFA, and I think the economics of the participation agreement that we've talked about, is really the ability that tax revenues collected with regard to a particular facility and a particular locality can be shared, provided that locality passes an ordinance to remit those tax revenues to the facility. Separately, too, that member localities may agree to revenue and economic sharing arrangements. Termination of the RIFA, of course, could be dissolved, but if a locality desires to withdraw from the RIFA, the mechanism for that is to simply obtain approval of a majority of the jurisdictions and to settle up any debt obligations that have been incurred while the locality was participating in the RIFA. Happy to address any questions that you have, and
I don't have any questions. Thank you. It seems pretty logical to me.
Thank you, Council. One question, how many RIFAs are there in the Commonwealth?
It's a tough question to answer.
Okay.
Because the Library of Congress is very slow at filing the documentation related to these. And I think we're back in the Kane administration now that still has unfiled documentation with regard to these. So our request for information, we haven't been able to get but so much information. I'm aware of 7, I believe, as Michelle indicated, mostly in the western and southwestern portion of the state. Roanoke and southwestern Virginia are sort of the bulk of these thus far. There's the Virginia First, is Bland, Giles, Montgomery, Roanoke, Pulaski, and Wythe counties. Cities of Roanoke, Radford, Salem, towns of Christiansburg, Dublin, Narrows. Bland and Wythe counties are in a separate RIFA. Smith, Washington RIFA. Amelia, Brunswick, Charlotte, Cumberland, Lunenburg, and Prince Edward. City of Clarksville, County of Mecklenburg, Danville in Pennsylvania, Galax, and counties of Carroll and Grayson. Those are the ones that I'm aware of. There are others.
But it would make sense given the Go Virginia application that we would move forward with that. So thank you.
I don't have any questions either. Thank you very much for the presentation.
2 questions. Is there a role or authority for bonds or issuing tax credits?
There's authority for the issuance of bonds.
Could we go to just the revenue sharing slide for just a moment? 2 slides back. It says the governing body of the member locality in which a facility owned by the authority is located may direct by resolution or ordinance that all tax revenues collected with respect to the facility shall be remitted to the authority. So if the RIFA owns a facility in a locality and the locality doesn't do that, how do the members who have invested in the authority in that project get revenue back out of it if the locality where it's located isn't required to do that?
Well, I would think that would have to be resolved as part of the participation agreement for that facility. I would think you would negotiate that in the participation agreement, that's part and parcel part of the participation agreement. And otherwise, you wouldn't develop the facility.
Right. So the may is kind of a squishy may because it could be a shall depending upon what agreement is set up?
Well, no, I think the may is that there's a statutory and legal authority to do it, is the essence of that.
But you wouldn't get to the point where this happened if you didn't have an obligation to give the money back, because who's going to invest in something that's owned by the authority?
Well, exactly, but again, I think it's just a negotiation that's part of the participation agreement process. So that to me would be a material term in a participation agreement with respect to that facility, and you wouldn't enter into the participation agreement to develop this facility if that weren't part of the agreement.
Yeah, I would just say, I think, so the state code allows it, that's what the may is, but you wouldn't enter into this agreement unless the locality agreed to do it.
Right.
So he's just saying that the state code says that the locality may do it.
Right, it's just the way this is worded, it looks like the locality has the option not to give the money to the authority, but you wouldn't have an agreement if they didn't agree to that up front. Okay. The other question is, what happens to an inactive RIFA? If it just never does anything, does it continue to stay on the books?
Well, again, you can dissolve it if it's just inactive and.
There's no legislative requirement that you undertake at least one project every 5 years. No. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Lynn? And we will see this on our Thursday agenda. Thank you, sir.
Certainly. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry to say we're at the end of our background presentations and discussions for today. This takes us to City Council communications. Do any members have anything they would like to share? Mr. Pons, you've already shared one item earlier.
Yep, I do. School liaison met. Just a couple points of interest. The CDR at Lafayette's lease will not be renewed. Lafayette will be recapturing that space and use it for program activities of the school. I don't know. We know where CDR is moving to, but they're doing that. The other thing we talked about was capacity and utilization, and one of the concerns is, what are the trigger points in terms of communicating with the community that we have a capacity issue and then need to go out and start doing site selection and talk about buildings. And I think what they talked about was when we get to 85%, that's when we'll trigger point where the community will start having that conversation. The school board will have the conversation. And get to 90, we'll trigger the next step. The challenge is now we're already at 94%. So we have a capacity issue, and so they'll be talking about additional schools or additions, and so that's going to be an ongoing conversation.
It was reported in the media that conversation has already started at the school board meeting.
Yep.
Just want to report that the Chamber and Tourism Alliance Board of Directors met discussing organizational changes and bylaws, languages pursuant to SB 942, and also want to just also note that Old Town Medical and Dental Center celebrated its 25th anniversary and honored Ann Yankovic through their daughters Kathy Hornsby and Julie Hummel, and Drew Trivet, his wife, and myself were in attendance.
The only thing is the EDA has their meeting this week.
And I wonder if the chief wanted to mention about the open house on Saturday?
Chief, would you like to mention something?
So the Williamsburg Fire Department open house is Saturday from 10 to 2. We encourage everybody to come out. It's always a great event. Very well participation has been really high in the past, and we would expect Saturday is going to be the same. A lot of events coming that will be available to everyone, and also free hot dogs.
Wow. Thank you, Chief. Schedule of meetings. Mr. Trivet, anything you'd like to highlight?
Let's see, tomorrow night we have the ARB here in this building at 6:30. The Economic Development Authority will meet on the 10th at 3 here in the Stryker Center. City Council meeting on Thursday, of course. Neighborhood Council will meet October the 13th. And since we pointed out the fire department, might as well mention the Canine Carnival, which is on the 13th as well from 1 p.m. So you can do the fire department, eat the hot dogs, and then go watch some race at the park, although we are keeping an eye on the weather.
Thank you. This takes us to the open forum portion of our meeting, where we welcome anybody in attendance to come forward and address council on any matter of interest to you. Seeing no one, we'll move on. I believe we have an item for closed session.
Yes, sir. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning city manager search.
Second.
Ms. Bertram.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Council will take a brief recess and reconvene in closed session.